All right. Hello, everyone. This is Linda G. Robert. I'm your Back in the Groove Again coach, and I'm here to help you live your best life now so that you can love what you do. One of my goals this year is to connect with interesting people that I've connected with, over the last several months. And one of those friends, one of those connections is Leslie Ahee, a very caring and passionate woman. Leslie Ahee graduated from Algonquin College in 1992 with a Developmental Services Worker Diploma. In April 2023, Leslie graduated with a certificate as a death doula from Home Hospice Association, and I will be asking you about this for sure. She has since been supporting individuals and support teams with end-of-life care and planning at the Ottawa Carleton Association for persons with developmental disabilities. Leslie has been employed at the Ottawa Carleton Association for Persons with Developmental Disabilities for 32 years. Wow, and is currently a residential supervisor. Her passion is to promote person-centered thinking, not only during life, but also helping supported individuals who are dying. I have to say, well, welcome to the
Thanks,
program.
Linda. It's lovely to be with you.
Yes, I have to say, my brother worked in this field for years. He graduated from the program from Cambrian in Sudbury.
Okay.
And then he also worked in the field for many, many years until his passing in February 2020. He worked and lived in St. Thomas. So, my heart goes out to you and people like you and my brother because you have the heart at the right place. Now, I want to find out more about death doula, and we'll talk, about your work as well. But what is that? That's fascinating.
So, death doula is the certification I have from Home Hospice Association, but it can be called different things. People call it a death midwife sometimes, so that sort of puts people in the right frame of mind. So just like a birthing doula
Right.
takes care of new mothers and helps support them through the birth and through the baby, getting used to having a baby and all the stuff that comes with it. A death doula or an end of life doula or a death midwife does the same thing at the end of life. So really, I companion people, and I love that word. So I spend a lot of time companioning individuals as they are on their end of life journey. We don't do anything of the medical part of it that we leave to the professionals, but we're really
Right.
there to make sure that it's what they want. Their journey is the way they want it to be. So I do some advanced care planning with people. I do some legacy work, and I would love to talk to you a little bit more about that because that's my favorite thing in the world.
Okay.
Um,
Let's let's
we
do
help
that.
arrange vigils. So like who do you want with you as you're dying? And then I also help with during the bereavement process. So in
Oh,
my role at, and it's a really long name, God bless you for saying it twice, the Ottawa Carleton Association for Persons
sorry,
with
I didn't want
Developmental
to be
Disabilities.
association, but
We kind of call it OCAP because it's
yeah,
far too
okay.
long. Our half-hour conversation would be would be used just saying the name. Um, I support staff teams. So there are 19 residential programs in at OCAP, so there's a lot of people that we support, and as we all are aging, some people are not aging healthy.
Yes.
So I'm there just to support the teams, the individual themselves, their families. I'm doing a lot of family support right now too, just trying to navigate the system a little bit, um and just I just listen. I
Yeah.
actively listen, and I empathize, and I validate that their feelings are normal, and it's it's beautiful. I We refer to person-centered living, like person-centered planning during everyone's life, but we don't really think about person-centered death planning, right? So my goal is kind of to make it person-centered lives
Yeah.
beginning to end.
And in our culture, we don't, well, I guess this is my opinion, but I'm not sure. we don't value death necessarily as it is in other cultures.
We're sort of afraid of it, aren't we?
We don't even talk about it, you
No.
know? We know it's going to happen, but we don't talk about it.
No,
We don't
it's
talk.
really, Linda, it's the only sure thing in life. I know there's the saying, there's the death and
Correct.
taxes thing, but we know people don't pay taxes, but everybody dies. And why
Right.
why are we so afraid of it when it can be a beautiful thing? It really is. It
Yeah.
for me, and people think this sounds really weird, but it's an
Yeah.
honor for me to be with someone when they're dying, when they're actively dying. I find
Yeah.
that the most honored thing I've ever done is to be with someone when they die.
Yes. And I have to say that I've done it twice, my mom and my dad. And it was, when I was younger, it was scary to even think about that. But when I witnessed my mom and my dad separately passing, it was like, it was something that I will never ever forget. Number one, I won't ever forget that moment. And I'm really glad that I was there during that moment. So the work that you do, like to coordinate, to bring family together, and of course to guide the individual through this process, I imagine it might start even before the person knows that they're passing, right? Or they will be passing, I should say.
Absolutely. So, we're taught in our course that we could, basically you start at the when you're given a life limiting diagnosis, but it
Okay.
doesn't have to start there. You and I could do some advanced planning right now. I could advance plan with my son who's 26. It's conversation. It's talking about, what I would like, what you would like your end of life to look like. And
Right.
I
And we're
think
not just talking about a will and a power of attorney kind of thing,
no,
right?
no. Oh
I,
my goodness, there's so much more to it than that.
right,
Like you just said, the will and the power of attorney, and do you want to be cremated or buried? Those are the top the top choices, really.
right,
But then there's just so much more. Like, how do you want people to remember you?
right. Yeah.
Um, is there, and this is what legacy work is:
Yeah.
finding meaning in life and how people want to be remembered. And it's a really meaningful way of coping because it's changing your mindset, because I'm sure that people who are dying aren't feeling their best.
No.
So this is bringing a little bit of positivity. So let's look at something that you would like people to remember you by. People make scrapbooks. They
Right.
um, organize their photos on a digital photo
Right. Right.
frame.
And
The
you know what?
gentleman that I support
Right.
takes beautiful pictures. So he wants his photo that's meaningful to him framed and put in our head office and at the program where he anticipates dying at. So,
Right.
legacy work is so different. It could be letters to
Yeah.
people. So whatever brings meaning, however you want to be remembered.
Right. And I
And
love
then
the
there's the whole
fact,
vigil part, right, Linda? Like,
yeah.
do you want people to come sit with you? Do you want to be alone? Do you want your window open? Do you want fresh air? Do you want
Wow.
music playing? Do you
Details
want
like that.
like
Details like that.
everything? It's so much more than just the little things. Or
Right.
well, they're not little things. They're big things like the POA and the DNR and all those acronyms,
Sure. Sure.
but there's so much more to it.
Well, I think the fact that, for example, you mentioned you want the window open, do you want the lights on, those details make it that the person is actually choosing. And I've been talking a lot about choice lately, but they're choosing how they want to experience this. I love that. Right down to the fine details.
So I'm
And
going to ask you
I
a question, Linda. Have
sure.
you considered what, and we call that dying well. Have you ever considered what dying well looks like to you?
Well, that's a really good question. I know that I don't want to die well alone. I know that. I think that would be really sad. So I definitely want my children to be around me for sure, children and grandchildren for sure. But the rest, I haven't really thought about, to be honest with you. I just know for now, that's a great question. I'd have to give it more thought.
I kind
that
of threw it at you. I'm sorry.
no, no, that's okay. But for sure, I don't want to die alone. I want my family to be around me, my grandkids to be around me. And I do want to talk about, well, obviously, good memories that we've had. And my kids and I, we do a lot about that. Now that they're adults, they tend to mention that a lot. But I do want to have that type of conversation now. Of course, that'll depend on my circumstances at the
Hmm.
time.
But even if you're not, let's say you're not responsive,
Right,
you're there, but you're not
right,
able to communicate. It's
right.
still lovely for to have your family around you, them talking about memories,
And I
right?
think that
That's beautiful.
if I'm not communicative, then of course I want my family to talk to me, to talk to them, to talk to us about what they remember the most, what they will remember the most about me. My sense of humor, the fact that I love music, that I would always put the radio on in the car when the kids were little. Anything really that brings them really good memories of my life as a parent and as a grandparent. Of
And
course, I
as
have a
they
life.
grieve, Linda, that will give them such comfort. It really
Yeah,
will. That will give them such comfort knowing that I have these amazing memories of
yeah,
mom singing to these songs in the car
right.
when we were
But
going
you know what it
places.
is,
And
Lindsay? I have one son in particular that avoids it. Okay, and I know it. I know it. He did not want to be present when my dad passed. He didn't. And I said, okay. And so I was there by myself when my dad passed. He didn't want to be there. I know this is going to be and for my other son too, but I think my other son would be with me. But the other one, I don't know. I don't know if he would be there, and I'm not sure. I would hope that he would be. So
yeah,
these are conversations that I will have with them, to
yeah,
discuss that.
definitely, it's important to make your wishes known. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and ideally, it would be lovely if people can respect your wishes. But
Right.
we completely understand that death is not easy for
Right.
everyone.
That's right. Right. And so like with your the clients that you work with or the team as well, how do you help them through this process? How do you help the team? And how do you help that individual through that process?
It truly is just a lot of, and I used the word before, companioning. It's just being present for them. Um, if I've supported an individual that was in the hospital, so I just sat there with him and held his hand and played music for him, and sort of, he had beautiful curly hair, so I couldn't help myself. I kept playing with his curls. Um, and he allowed that, like, he didn't pull away. Had he pulled away, obviously I would have respected his no, but he seemed to be enjoying it, and in fact his little foot was moving when I was playing the music, so that made me feel really good that we've connected somehow.
So
um
that was a sign for you. You knew when you
yeah,
saw his foot move that he's here, he's connecting. Oh, that's
yes,
wonderful.
it was
Yeah.
it was lovely. With the staff teams, I make myself available to be there if they want to talk. If they don't want to talk, that's okay.
Yeah.
um, Often our folks that we support, the families don't want to have a funeral per se.
Right.
So I help sort of facilitate celebrations of life,
Right.
because who doesn't love a party? these,
Well,
these these individuals deserve recognition for their lives, because they're incredible people just as anyone else. And so if it's simple as I've held an ice cream party because the individual just loved ice cream, so we had a do it yourself sundae bar sort
sure,
of thing
sure.
because that was
Yeah.
meaningful to him.
Yeah.
Having a funeral wouldn't have been meaningful to him.
No,
So it's a lot about building relationships and knowing people, and the staff teams know these individuals so well that I do rely upon them a lot for information. I've been
sure.
around 32 years and I do know a lot about a lot of people, but I don't know everything. I haven't, I don't work with people on a daily basis in a lot of other programs. So rely on the advocacy of other staff to,
Right,
and I'm just there to help guide.
right.
I tend to write the tribute for the individual. Through the association I work, we send out an announcement that someone's passed away. So I just, I sort of write a in memory of. So that's an informal obituary, really.
Right, yeah.
It's just it's so different. It's not been talked about a lot because, as we talked about
No,
earlier, death isn't, and I don't know why. I'm not sure what brought me to this point.
that's a good question.
Yeah,
That's
like
a,
I've been doing a lot of thinking about it, and I had an epiphany the other day. So in grade 6, I grew up in Coburg, Ontario. So it's, not it wasn't a very big town at the time. And grade 6, we had like an employment day or whatever. So you could pick different employers around town and you could go visit. And I picked the funeral home.
really, wow.
So in grade 6, like I'm going back thinking, why would I have done that? Like it's bizarre, but maybe that was the start of this path I'm on now. I really don't know. Yeah,
Well, there's a curiosity, there is a curiosity at a certain age, I think, about death. Maybe Aunt Josephine died or something, if I don't know. But there's a curiosity, especially when we hear the word death, because I'm thinking you probably would not have thought about that on your own unless you watched the program. I remember, what was the name of that movie oh, where it was about a young girl, young boy, but the young girl, I think her dad was a funeral director. It was with
okay.
what's his name there? McCollum, you know.
It'll come to you later, I'm sure. You'll have to message me later. My I was shielded from death actually growing up. My
Oh,
parents, when my
oh,
grandmother passed away and then my grandfather passed away, my parents would get a babysitter for all of the cousins and they would go to the funeral and do everything, and we would stay back. So I was quite shielded. I remember the first funeral I went to was my uncle, so I guess my parents got a little bit more progressive. And I'll never forget, my brother was drawn to my uncle's watch that was on his wrist, because and it was still going. He thought because my uncle died, time should have stopped.
oh, right.
And that fascinates me still to this day. So he was like very curious, as we are when we're young, and just sat there and stared at my uncle's watch and couldn't figure out why it's still going because he's gone.
That is so interesting. Time continue. That's wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, wow. Now we were talking about young children and death. I remember thinking years ago that young children well, they don't necessarily view death as different, but their perception of death is definitely dependent on their parents a lot. Because if they go to a funeral home, they might see somebody who's lying down, and not really understand that they'll never come back. But I think that the fears are instilled by our parents.
I
That's just
agree
an opinion.
100%.
Yeah, and we don't talk about it. We didn't talk about it. My first husband died. He died when I was 21, and when I heard the word passing, I had no idea what it meant at the time. The nurse had to tell me he's dead, and I was in shock as well, of course. But it was the word I hadn't heard before. He passed. Didn't know what that meant. I was 21, but the word death, of course, I understood. And when I went to the funeral home, I had to choose the casket with his mom and all that. It was a little bit kind of leery, I have to admit. But the funeral itself was a complete daze. So as a child, I think it would have been a completely different experience.
Oh,
Do
I'm
you want to
sure.
talk about the experience of it? Whether you're a child, teenager, an adult, a parent, let's talk a little bit about the experience of it from, of course, not the person's who's passed, but the family's perspective, the cousin's perspective, the niece's perspective, for example. Because you mentioned you work with families as well.
I do. Um, the people that we support are tend to be older. We don't deal with a lot of younger individuals, so family members are quite elderly,
Right.
and they have a, I don't want to generalize, but often they look at their disabled child, brother, sister, family member differently than I do as a professional that works with them. So I always presume competence. I always give them credit for being able to communicate their wants and needs. But family members see them differently. They sort of see them as eternal children, right? Like they don't think that they have the capacity to make these sort of decisions. So again, they sort of shield them from
Right.
it. So a lot of families have made plans for their loved ones, which is fabulous, but I don't think it's what the individual would really want. So, that's a bit of a, I kind of have a little bit of a internal debate about that. Do I follow the wishes of the family, which are very important to be respected,
Sure.
but my job's to support the individual too.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if Jane says Jane's parents want her to have a formal church funeral and all that sort of stuff, but Jane hasn't stepped foot in a church since she was a little girl, and all she wants to do is have a party and have her friends remember
Right.
her that way. It's a tough call, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It would
And
be.
you do hear of families not agreeing when people
Right.
pass away and die, that you don't, families don't agree on stuff. That's sort of the same situation, I guess.
Yeah, that's a challenging. Yeah, I'm kind of glad I'm not in your shoes or the staff shoes because, yeah, that's challenging for sure. Because I was thinking, in Spanish, I'm in Mexico right now, so my first thought was, ¿por qué no? Why not have a party if that's what they wanted? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
for God's sakes, that's what they want. Let's have a party.
exactly. But if there's
But
family around still, how does one navigate that? Thankfully, I haven't really had to deal with that too much. Right now, I'm working with families that sort of weren't anticipating their loved one passing away. It was a sudden event,
right,
and I'm dealing with family members that didn't. I guess if you know that you're ill, you sort of have anticipatory grief, right? You know it's coming, and
that's right.
and
Start grieving,
and
yeah.
and you can start grieving. Where in this situation, it was a complete shock, and they don't know. They feel bad for feeling the way they feel or not feeling enough, and yeah, it's a very, very challenging time, isn't it?
Can be, yes. But when you witness somebody going through all of this, I think it's a privilege in a sense, in a sense, because you and your staff, you have the opportunity to really witness this whole entire process. On that note, does it make your death, and sorry to bring this up, but does it make your death easier? Or or death in general easier?
I think it does. Um,
Wondering, thinking it might too, but
yeah, I think it does. Um, my husband, I'm driving him crazy because I'm asking him all these questions that I talk to individuals and support teams and other people about, and he just looks at me like, no, let's not go there. He's one of these,
right,
I don't want to talk about it. So I kind of know, I know what I think he wants, but I
right,
don't know for sure. And his whole thing is, well, what does it matter? I'm dead.
right. Oh, yes, yeah.
So
Mhm.
that's anyway. Um,
Yeah,
and it is an honor to be with someone as they pass away. It really is. There's a gentleman that we supported in one group home, and I got the call at like 20 after 1 in the morning that he wasn't doing well, and that they just called to let me know because I'd asked them. So I booted over. It was on, of course, at the opposite end of Ottawa, and he waited for me. And to
oh,
me,
yeah,
that was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. That this gentleman waited for me to get there, and then within 15 minutes, he took his last breath. And we were holding his hand and playing gentle music, and it was so peaceful. All the rest of the other individuals were sleeping in their rooms, so the house was quiet. It was dark. The when the funeral home came to pick him up, it didn't impact the other individuals because it was so early in the morning.
Right.
It was just beautiful. It was, that's like, your father is going to stay with you. That will stay with me forever.
Yes, there's something about it. And
Yeah.
you mentioned waiting. You mentioned waiting. Well, thanks for bringing that up, because I remember when before my mom passed, I should say, I made sure that everyone that was important in her life was there. My parents had been divorced for years, but I wanted my dad to be there because they were still connected in, one way or another. So I brought people together. And my son, my older one, was in North Bay, and he needed to get a ride to get to Sudbury. And for some reason, you were talking about waiting. My mom must have waited for everybody to be there, because he walked in and it wasn't a few minutes later, and I was right next to my mom. I could see her. Another thing that came up, for some reason, I saw her as a young woman. It was weird, okay?
Wow.
When I was looking at her, almost taking the last breath, and everybody is there by that time, I saw her face as a young woman. It was weird, but I remember that. She
That's
looked,
lovely. Oh my God. You're giving me goosebumps.
it
Oh,
was kind of weird, okay? But I remember that. And then of course she passed, but the waiting part is what I wanted to kind of mention. Is that, does that happen? Like, or is this just, I don't know.
I'm not sure if it truly happens or if it's just something we're feeling and it makes us feel a certain way. I've heard of it happening often.
Yeah.
Is it a coincidence? Like, I don't know.
Well,
Sometimes people's wills are strong and they don't go until they're ready to go. They can hang
that's
on for a
right.
very long time, and I've heard of instances where families around all the time and then they step out to go get a coffee or something,
Right,
and the
right.
person dies then because it's just been too much. It's been too overwhelming, and they've decided. So even if you're not um, aware and responsive, you still have that will. People's wills are
Yeah,
amazing.
that's amazing. That is really amazing, because that's another story. I remember for my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, that's what happened. My dad and his brother went downstairs to get a cup of coffee or something like that. By the time they came back, she had passed. So it's interesting, because I do think that people choose, or something, something happens that they have that willingness to stay for a certain time, and then after a point, it's time to go, it's time to pass, and they choose the right moment for whatever reason
For
they,
them.
exactly, for whatever
Exactly.
reason they
I've
have.
I've heard of stories where people will say, it's okay now, mom, or whatever. You can go
Right,
now. You fought for so long. We've said goodbye. I love you.
right,
It's okay now. You can go be with dad or whatever. And
yeah,
they go.
yeah.
It's so neat.
Or they think, I'll go when I'm ready to go, because my dad would probably say that. I'll go when I'm ready to go,
Yeah.
even though I'm not
That sounds like
ready.
my dad too.
Just a quick story, not about the death part, but I remember when my dad was sick at a point, not, this was a year before he passed. He was sick, and I remember thinking and talking with him about being placed in a nursing home. He stayed in an apartment until the end, but I remember asking him and, highly suggesting that he consider going to a nursing home. And that was probably because at the time I was living in Ottawa, and I was getting uh, worried every time I would get a call that when I got to Sudbury, you know, so I thought, let's just make sure he's nice and safe. And if he fall, there's a nursing staff with you. Anyways, the bottom line was, he said to me, "Are you ready to go to a nursing home, Linda? Like, are you ready to go?" And I said, "No." Well, he said, "Well, that was the whole point. Don't try to get me into a nursing home when I'm not ready to go to a nursing home. In other words, my dad was not ready. So the message was clear. I'll decide when I go to a nursing home. Not you.
So you can see how easy it is to talk about death, really, and all sorts of different factors about it. We thought it was uncomfortable at first. People think it's uncomfortable, but once you start the conversation rolling, it doesn't have to be dark and it doesn't have to be sad. You can, there's so much other aspects to this that, and you and I could talk for hours about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish we could, but we can't.
Yeah. I got to go back to work.
Anyway, yeah, there is a lot to talk about, but I think this opens up conversation around it.
And that's my goal, just to start conversations and start the thought process and try to change the thinking to make it, person-centered across the board.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah. And as it should be, as it should be. I think my dad would have said, and as it should be. Anyways, it was a pleasure talking with you, Leslie. How can people find out more about you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm
Great.
under Leslie Ann Ahee on LinkedIn, so they can find me there. I'm going to try and add, I'm in the process of trying to branch out a little bit from just working with people with disabilities to maybe doing some end of life support within the city of Ottawa. So stay tuned. I'm going to probably add an email address and a little bit more information on LinkedIn.
Great. Looking forward to it. And I will add the details on this video as well.
Perfect. Thank you so
Thank
much, Linda. It's
welcome.
been a pleasure.
You're very welcome. Been a pleasure too.